Wednesday, July 12. Christ above all powers. Paul has celebrated the exaltation of Jesus, who now sits with the Father on the throne of the cosmos. Having defined the position of Christ in relationship to the Father, seated at his right hand in the heavenly places, as it says in Ephesians 1:20, Paul turns to the relationship of Jesus to the powers. As co-regent with the Father, Jesus is far above them all, it says in Ephesians 1:21. Compare Paul's mentioning of evil spiritual powers in Ephesians 1:21, Ephesians 2:2, Ephesians 6:12. Why do you think Paul is so interested in these powers? Ephesians 1 verse 21, far above all principality and power and might and dominion, and every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in that which is to come. And Ephesians 2 verse 2, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. And Ephesians 6:12, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Acts 19, verses 11 to 12, with its story of the 7 sons of Sceva, illustrates that Ephesus at the time of Paul was a centre for the magic arts. Let's read that story in Acts 19, verses 11 to 20. Now God worked unusual miracles by the hands of Paul, so that even handkerchiefs or aprons were brought from his body to the sick, and the diseases left them, and the evil spirits went out of them. Then some of the itinerant Jewish exorcists took it upon themselves to call the name of the Lord Jesus over those who had evil spirits, saying, we exorcise you by the Jesus whom Paul preaches. Also, there were 7 sons of Sceva, a Jewish chief priest, who did so. And the evil spirit answered and said, Jesus I know, and Paul I know, but who are you? Then the man in whom the evil spirit was leaped on them, overpowered them, and prevailed against them, so that they fled out of that house naked and wounded. This became known both to all Jews and Greeks dwelling in Ephesus, and fear fell on them all. And the name of the Lord Jesus was magnified. And many who had believed came confessing and telling their deeds. Also, many of those who had practised magic brought their books together and burned them in the sight of all, and they counted up the value of them, and it totalled 50,000 pieces of silver. So the word of the Lord grew mightily and prevailed. Clinton E. Arnold, in Power and Magic, The Concept of Power and Ephesians, page 18, writes, the overriding characteristic of the practice of magic throughout the Hellenistic world was the cognizance of a spirit world experiencing influence over virtually every aspect of life. The goal of the magician was to discern the helpful spirits from the harmful ones and learn the distinct operations and the relative strengths and authorities of the spirits. Through this knowledge, means could be constructed, with spoken or written formulas, amulets, etc., for the manipulation of the spirits in the interest of the individual person. With the proper formula, a spirit-induced sickness could be cured, or a chariot race could be won. End of quote. The interest in naming deities and powers in spells was a feature of religious life in Ephesus, as we read there in Acts 19:13, and among some even today. Paul wishes to make clear the relationship between Christ and the powers. The exalted Jesus is, as it says in Ephesians 1:21, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion. Just to be sure that his audience understands that there's no power outside of the sovereignty of Jesus, he adds an allusion to the practice of gathering up the names of deities in spells. In Ephesians 1:21, and above every name that is named, it reads. Turning from the dimension of space to that of time, Paul stresses the unlimited chronology of Jesus' exalted rule. His rule over all powers applies, as it says in verse 21, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. And so to finish today, what are some present-day manifestations of these same evil forces, and how can we make sure that we don't get caught up in any of them? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.